Hello everyone. I think it's already time to get going. So welcome to this IETF meeting. This is the COSI meeting. This is an official IETF meeting, and as such the note well applies. Please make sure you are familiar with it before participating in any discussions. We have a reminder for the IETF Code of Conduct. Please be respectful of the others and treat them with courtesy. And yes, and this is a reminder. Hopefully you know all that already. And moving on. So this is our agenda for today. We'll start with some administrative and then we'll have the document status of the working group documents. I will spend a bit of time to discuss the X509 draft, the CBOR encoding, the certificates draft, and we will hear about two new drafts that might be of interest for the working group. And we have a bit of flex time at the end if there are any other topics. Is there any bashing of this agenda? I'll take that as a no. So the note well was presented. The minutes can be accessed here. We will need a minute taker or a person responsible for the minutes. Are there any volunteers? We only need someone to make sure that the action items are taken. So it shouldn't be too difficult. Maybe John, could you look at that and yeah, make sure.
I can help out if you want.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you, Joran. And we also need a Jabber person to be like monitoring the chat. Maybe if there are no volunteers. Okay, wonderful. We have Chris to help with Jabber. Thank you. Thank you both. So then a reminder, this meeting and the attendance is recorded. So yes. And we discussed already the agenda. With that, I think we can move to the next slide for the document status. We have 4 documents that are in a very advanced state and which we hope to be able to complete very soon. The hash algorithms that has some questions from the RFC editor. I have cited the questions and some answers, some possible answers at this address in the GitHub repository. If anyone can, please take a look and comment. Otherwise, in 1-2 weeks, I will provide those answers to the RFC editor. With that, the next draft is the 8152 bis aux draft. It is in Hot 48 for some time. The same applies to the BIS document. There have been some small discussions that needed to be completed, and I believe there was a suggestion by Johan for doing a small modification. Do you want to discuss that now, given that everyone is around? Yes.
So, sorry, Viola, was that a question about the BIS algs or the BIS struct?
So I remember there was the issue with integers. I think it was.
Yeah, I think this was allowing the key ID to be both integer and a byte string. Previously, it was just a byte string.
Yes.
I forget which track it was in.
Yeah. So there is a PR on the struct draft, which is doing just that, adding the int. And then there was an email exchange on how should we handle this, given that the draft is in a progress state. And I think the proposal was that we should actually try to make the change in the document now. But the question is, do we need to have further reviews, or how can we, how do we handle this proposed change?
So this is Mike Jones speaking as chair. The point of taking stuff to internet standard from draft standard is to preserve the parts that are in use without any changes. And changing the format of the key ID is a breaking change. It will, if people use ints, it will break existing implementations. Therefore, I'm strongly against ever doing this. It's unnecessary. We should not do this. We should close the PR. Can you put a link to the PR in the chat, please, and I will close it. This goes against what BIS documents and internet standards are intended to do.
So I'm sorry, I'm a little bit busy doing both the agenda and the notes and trying to find this link, but I'm on my way.
Karsten?
Well, thank you. I think when we talk about internet standards documents, we always have interesting discussions because not everybody actually has run through this process. And what internet standards are has changed a little bit over the course of the last 10 years in the IETF. So basically what Mike said is certainly true. On the other hand, having experience with using a protocol can also mean that you learn something. And I think the learning here was that there are applications where having a numeric key ID is quite useful. So we probably wouldn't want to rearrange the structure of COSI encrypt 0 or something at this stage. That would be wrong. But doing a small fix like this is well within what can be done on the way from a proposed standard to an internet standard. So that's just one point I would like to make. I don't have a strong opinion on the point itself, whether we need the numeric key, but I'm also not working with the protocols that would benefit from that most. So I leave it to others to make that point, but I want to say that the process argument is important, but I don't think it actually applies to this particular situation.
It remains a breaking change, which is something you're not allowed to do during the process of taking a draft standard to standard. If anybody uses this, it breaks all the existing implementations. They can't parse it. It would mean that we have to pull the draft out of the RFC editor queue, which is actually in auth 48, and return it to the working group, and it is not worth doing. Furthermore, the arguments for numeric values, I think, don't hold up, because you can use the same byte string as you would use for the numeric representation, and at most you're adding a byte to the value. That is not worth pulling the document out of the internet standard queue.
So I just want to add that there was a long thread on the mailing list, on the COSI mailing list, and the conclusion was that we should make this change. And now it's always good to have new input on the topic, but this input was not provided really.
Look, I'm sorry I didn't weigh in on the thread, but we should not be making breaking changes in the internet standard process.
Yes, John, and then Ben, and probably
Yeah, I agree with what Karsten said, that this is something that is learned from experience and can very well be done in an internet standard. I definitely don't think this is a breaking change. This is as breaking as registering a new algorithm. If you use that new algorithm, none of the old deployments will be able to talk to you. So I don't really understand why this would be more breaking than registering algorithm. Like Göran said, I was a bit surprised. I think this was discussed quite long and was strong support. I think it was an AD suggesting that it was best to be done already now. But I definitely think it needs to be done. One byte actually matters. I don't have a strong opinion about doing it now or in a separate draft.
The difference between adding an algorithm, which I understand, is that cryptographic agility demands the ability to add algorithms. And that's an expected extension point. Changing one of the most basic data structures in COSI is not an expected change. And again, you're right that if somebody uses a new algorithm and it's not supported by the implementation, that'll break that implementation. And if somebody changes the data structure, that will break all implementations. But the difference is there's no expectation for the basic data structures changing. There is an expectation for new algorithms.
And next to you, Kata, as the responsible AD. So I think that we've seen a couple of different perspectives portrayed about what the standards process means in going from proposed standard to internet standard. And I basically agree with what Karsten said, that there is some scope for issues that are discovered with the spec as it was in proposed standard form when we go to internet standard. And what exactly constitutes such a fix is something of a subjective determination. But furthermore, it's something that we do need to get both working group consensus on and full IETF consensus on. And so if we were to propose to make this change in this document, I would feel a need to go through a specific working group last call, and I believe also an IETF last call, because as Mike points out, this is in some sense a significant change. It's not something I'm comfortable just doing at the last minute in Auth48. There is the potential for real consequences for implementations. And so it would be something that we need focused attention on. I will also mention that if we do not want to make this change in this document going to internet standard, it's also an option to have a separate document that is proposed standard that would then update the internet standard to be RFC to make this change. And I think there was also a note in the chat, which maybe Bob is getting up to the mic to say right after me, about being able to change the wire encoding if there's also a version or a feature flag that you can use to gate that. So I'm hearing everything that has, every point that's been raised, and there's valid concerns all around, and so this is not a clear-cut decision to make, at least in my mind. So over to you, Bob, or yeah, Mike, go ahead.
And this is Mike. I would be fine with this starting in an individual draft that's separate from the internet standard as a proposed extension, and then people could adopt the extension or not. But this should go through the normal review process. This shouldn't be crammed into a document in Auth48.
Right,
So,
I don't think anyone is saying we're going to make it during Auth48. This would be something that has to come back to the working group and the IETF as a whole if we choose to do it in this document.
okay, I thought I heard people asking to do that. Maybe I misunderstood, but I'll defer to the queue.
Okay, I think that brings up Bob.
Decades, and I can find going from proposed to standard cases where important changes were made because there were oops, or we lacked something or whatever, and we've had to make changes. And because we feel the things, we've learned that we don't have the flexibility we need for whatever reason. Almost always there was some versioning that we could use to make so we didn't break what was deployed and make products migrate cleanly to what is standard. So hopefully there is some version that we can use for making this change. As to what was just mentioned by DKG, if we got products that don't look at version before they start decoding the things, that's their problem. That's why we have versioning in these sorts of things, or we hope we have versioning. So I'll just wrap it up with that as a community, we do make these sorts of changes. As a community, that's why we've learned painfully to include versioning.
Yes, Carsten, I think that should be the last comment and we should move on.
Yeah, let me just quickly point out that a version is not needed to allow integers in this place, because the CBOR encoding makes sure that you notice that there is something there that you didn't expect. So a version would probably only cloud the issue here. So essentially the major type in that field plays the same role that a version number would play in another situation. So if I were going to build a separate extension, I would simply say, let's extend the data type of that element. And people will notice if they don't interpret it, and there will be no false interoperability, which is really what versioning mostly is about.
So I really think we should move on and discuss this further, either on the mailing list or if we have time at the end. Just we are, I think, more than 10 minutes behind the schedule, and we have used all of our flex time. So let's continue and move back to this if time permits. So then the last two documents on this page are the X509 that we will discuss on the next slide. It is in it's past the ESG evaluation, but there are still a few small things that we need to improve before it can be progressed after that. And the last one is the countersign draft, which needs to be sent to the ISG, and this will be done right after this meeting. I think, yes, Russ?
So I believe that Michael Richardson was tagged to do the Zuckerberg's write-up, and that's the only thing we're waiting on, right?
It is already done. I hadn't noted that earlier, but yeah, it's done, and we can now send it to the ISG.
Okay, I think it's been done a long time, actually.
Yes, it has been done for quite some time. So with that, I will move on. So for the X509 document, there are a number of issues in GitHub. I believe most of them are already either resolved or marked as won't fixed. As you can see, some of them have the tag fixed question mark. Please, the people that participated in those discussions, take a look if the issues that were raised are really resolved. There was like a big merge request that finally got merged, but there were still some comments that weren't exactly addressed in it. So yes, please take a look at that. Ideally, I would like to have someone that will be responsible for wrapping this and declaring victory. And so for the fixed issues, and there is the media type issue where I believe we needed to discuss further with Karsten how to progress with that one, whether we want one media type or multiple media types. I think the discussion was around that and how to formulate it in the draft. Yes.
Was there an action there? I'm sorry.
So I believe the action is,
apart from everyone to have a look, who is engaged in X509, to have a look at the open issues.
so the action for me is the chairs and Karsten to discuss the media type, or if Karsten already has a good idea what kind of text could be suggested, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, let's have a small chat and try to finish that. Yes, Karsten?
Yeah, sorry. For some reason, this was not on my to-do list. This should be a very quick thing to do.
Okay. Sounds perfect. Thank you. And yes, I think the last time it was John who prepared the pull request. John, would you be willing to take another look at the questions and everyone to also take a look, and unless anyone complains about their issue not being resolved, and if you don't see anything, please just fix those issues. Would that be okay for you?
I took a quick look some week ago. I think it looked good. I didn't have any comments.
Yeah, thank you. So I think those were the important things, and yes, we wanted to take another look whether the phrasing of the protection over X5 back and chain and X5T is clear enough. I believe during the last interim meeting we said we want to at least strongly recommend protecting those parameters. So yes, I will create an issue and work on that. And of course, anyone that has a moment to help with that, please just let me know. But otherwise, let's say I will be taking this item. And with that, I think those are all the remaining issues for the X509 document, and we can move on to the presentation from Joran. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, okay, good.
Let me just stop my presentation and accept your.
Okay, can you see the slides as well?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is going to be quick. There is just one slide, or there is two slides, but there is only one slide with content, and that's basically status and next steps. the base specification is stable. We have had a discussion already at the interim meeting. There is this seems to be fairly mature. We would encourage more reviews to both look at this specification and also see if there is an interest in interop testing, or I mean at least testing the results from the Rust code, which is in the GitHub repo. There was one proposal when we discussed this last time during the interim, and that is that the revocation parts, it's currently only talking about CRLs, should be moved to a separate draft. So we should try to complete this part without revocation, and then have CRLs and other revocation aspects in a separate draft. So that's basically the only things that we as authors have. I don't know if John wants to add here, who has been doing the coding and main part of the specification. You want to add something?
Not much. I think we will have more time for C509 here after IETF 112. So I plan to do some. I already have some updated code. There was some bugs in the old code and it didn't support everything. So the code has been updated. I will share that in a month when I have checked it and so. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so that's it. First question, should we take these questions? Do the chairs want to leave this question about separating the draft into two pieces, whether we need to adopt the separate part or not? And also, it would be good to have a call for reviews if there are any. See if there are any volunteers. Ivailo?
Yes, for the adoption of a separate draft, or maybe even like the idea itself to have a separate draft, I believe that is fine. The motivation for that was because it's separate from the main concern of the draft, or what was the exact motivation there?
Well, maybe Carsten could fit in there.
Sorry, I was distracted.
Yes, Carsten.
Okay, so the question was, I mean, I think basically the reason why Carsten wanted to separate out the revocation parts was that we have one part which is fairly mature and the other is still in progress. And I suppose that would be a way of speeding things up, that we get something that is ready earlier. But maybe Carsten can add.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to this. So I think it would be good to finish C509. So if we can speed this up by doing CRL separately. I think we have more than one thing that could go into such a separate draft. I don't remember what the other things were.
CRLs and OCSP has been on the table.
Yes.
And currently, CRLs are in the draft, OCSP is not.
Yeah. So OCSP is probably the one that I'm more interested in than CRL. So I think this is the wrong way around. Benjamin, maybe you have a position on this.
I was just jumping in to say that we might end up in some situation where like the core C509 spec says, and you need to have some way of using or conveying revocation information. There are multiple ways to do so, which include but are not limited to CRLs and OCSP as specified in this other document. But if you want to do your own thing, that also meets the requirements of this spec. That's the sort of construction of the relationship between documents that we see with some regularity. This sort of thing makes some people a little uncomfortable because there's no mandatory to support way of doing this, and it's sort of saying, there's a key part of the correct operation of the system as a whole that we are not specifying, but in some cases it ends up being the least bad way to proceed. So I guess that's
Thanks, Ben. That's a good, really good input. So, I mean, we still have the option to keep it as it is if we think that is better for being more clear at what type of revocation should be mandatory, if any.
Yes, Joseph.
Some concern to move forward with this draft without having, a CRL draft or some kind of revocation draft that you could point to that would follow. I mean, it seems like it would be kind of a gap that could, during sector review or something else could be raised to kind of block moving this C509 from moving forward. So, I mean, if the CRL draft or OCSP draft exists and is progressing as well, then I think that would be fine. But separating them out is nervous.
Yeah, you're sort of pointing out that there's a risk that we end up in a state where we try to publish C509 and the other stuff just isn't ready yet. And we could sort of force the issue by putting in a normative reference so that the RFC will not actually be published until they're both ready. And I'm amenable to that for many of the reasons you described, but I'm reluctant to say that it is definitely required without getting some further input.
Yes, Russ.
I'm kind of opposed to the normative reference because if we just left it as it is and finished the work, we'd end up in the same place with one document. And that seems like a better outcome than a document that sits in the RFC editor's queue for a year.
Good point.
Hi there. I want to point out that OCSP doesn't actually necessarily work all that well. There's easy ways to block OCSP, and I would be reluctant to see this make the same mistakes that we've made for years in the X509 world about OCSP. In particular, with X509, we've been pushing on the OCSP must staple, trying to get that to be widely deployed. If C509 certs are going to be deployed, I'd like to see, the must staple stuff be there from the outset, because otherwise it introduces privacy issues and privacy issues if you don't do stapling, and if you don't require stapling, then you don't actually solve the timely revocation issue. So if you're going to try to do revocation, please take heed of the problems that we've run into for basically like a decade. I don't think that means that this should necessarily hold it up. You could reference the existing X509 must staple questions, and granted that wouldn't necessarily work for native CBOR, but you could normatively reference existing X509 must staple stuff, start work on the must staple OCSP or CRL work that's CBOR specific, and leave that out of a normative reference in this particular draft. Just have that subsequent draft update this one.
Okay, so my summary would be that having the CRL section would be a device to get this through the ISG. But well, given that CRLs are usually not what you want in a constrained environment, it's not what we would actually use. So it's RFC, what was it, 6919 must, but you know you won't. And then we will do something like OCSP, but better in the direction that DKG just said, to solve the real problem. Works for me.
Yes, John, and let's stop the discussion after.
Yes. I just read yesterday that Mozilla is focusing on something they call CRL Lite instead of OCSP, but I haven't really read up on what it is. But is that something that should be considered here?
We can, John, can you share that either in the minutes or somewhere so that people can take a look and maybe discuss that later? In the interest of time, I suggest that we move on and look at are there any volunteers for reviews? In order for this draft to progress, we will need some reviews, and I believe there was a good amount of support when we adopted it. So please, people that are interested in it progressing, try to read through it and provide some feedback. Okay, well, I don't see anyone volunteering for now, but yes, I imagine we'll have to reach out to people individually if there are no reviews. So, is there anything more for this presentation?
Nope, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then the next item is HB, KE, and RAS.
Okay, are you going to share the slides or am I?
Yes, I will share it.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Just as a bit of background, this is work that was started in the SUIT working group, where this same set of authors was working on a how do we encrypt firmware load. And we decided that it might be better to have the HPKE mechanism in COSE, because we probably weren't the only ones who were going to need it. And so basically we extracted that piece out of the SUIT document and are proposing that the COSE working group adopt it. So we give you a little bit of an introduction to the document. Next slide, please. So as I said, this was started as part of the firmware encryption. You can see that the document SUIT firmware encryption 00 basically is there. We wanted to to be able to support pre-shared keys, and that was already offered by COSE, but we also wanted to do the HPKE approach, which was not already straightforward in COSE, so we wrote our own structures, and we wanted to bring them here so that others can make use of that same work as opposed to it being tied tightly to the firmware encryption. Next slide. So like the other similar mechanisms, it's got 3 layers. Layer 3 maintains the parameters needed to generate the shared secret. Next slide. The middle layer contains the encrypted content encryption key. Next slide. And the top layer contains the encrypted payload. Of course, it continues to support a detached payload as well. Next slide. So as I said at the beginning, not burying the lead, we're asking the group to adopt this because we think it will have usefulness beyond firmware encryption. Next slide. We wanted to point out that there's already some implementation experience with this. The folks at ARM, in particular Hannes, has done this work. But it's based on Steve Farrell's Happy Key work that was done before that. Happy Key relies on OpenSSL and so on. But this is, the point is, it's not just a paper spec. And so I think that's the last slide. But I did want to point out that yesterday there's been some discussion on the mail list about this document already, and you know, we'll of course take the spec wherever that discussion leads if the group chooses to adopt it. I think that's it. Over to the chairs.
So my understanding is that your goal with this draft is for it to be adopted as a working group document once it is a little bit more advanced. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Do you want me to run the queue, or do you want to run it?
Yes, that would be good. Thank you.
Okay, Joe?
You're only using the unauthenticated modes for HPK. Do you guys have any use case for authenticated modes, or do you think it would be something that could be added in, or is there a restriction to COSE? I'm not that familiar with COSE. If that's
No, we don't. So in suit, we always have a signature and we optionally have encryption, and so we were depending on that. COSE has a similar structure where there's a signature or an encryption, but we could look at that if there's a need for it. But that's the current way the division is done.
okay? Thanks.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks. So you mentioned you wanted to add a deterministic authenticated encryption mode. I had brought up adding such a mode to the HPKE and CFRG, and I received a lot of pushback.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you have a better use case than what I was suggesting. Could you explain what your use case is?
So you're saying in the mail we had that discussion? Or
Yeah, I think I actually had a presentation at the last meeting too.
no. What I meant was, where are you saying I need it?
You suggested adding AES key wrap. You said we need AES key wrap in HPKE, and that's a deterministic authenticated encryption mode.
Indeed, the output of the HPKE is being used as the key encryption key. That is so that when a firmware package is distributed to multiple recipients, they each receive the same ciphertext and obtain the content encryption key by unwrapping the that key using the one that was encapsulated, a KEK that was encapsulated just for them. That's the mechanism we need it for.
So you're using the cipher inside of HPKE that is not AES key wrap. What you're saying, you're using that to wrap a key and then using that key to with AES key wrap.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Yeah, I think this is great work. I think COSI should work on this. Just more high-level question to COSI: how do we see, is HPKE the future of key exchange in COSI, or do we continue to add more non-HPKE algorithms also to COSI? I don't know. Very shortly, there will be new PQC chems. They will probably be added to HPKE, and they will need to be supported in COSI. Will we support both HPKE and non-HPKE, or will COSI only use HPKE? I don't have an answer to that question myself, but I think it's a high-level question we should ask ourselves if we adopt this draft, which I think we will.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either. I think LAMPS is struggling with the same question as the post-quantum KEMs come along. What's the cleanest way to embrace them? We're talking about a KEM recipient info in that environment. A similar thing could be considered here. I don't know what the best answer is, and it's really hard to guess what future algorithms will look like and what parameters they all need. So I guess this is part of the pain of being algorithm agile. Okay, so I didn't hear anybody speak against doing this. Does that mean we'll have a call for adoption on the list?
We can, yes.
This is Mike. I think that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the presentation and the discussion. And with that, let's move to the last topic for today, the fast verification friendly ECDSA. Yes, just a second.
Hello? Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Sorry, I got an error on my screen for some reason.
We are not seeing any slides, though.
Oh,
Do you want me to share the slides in the interest of time, and you will just let me know when to advance? Okay.
All right. Good morning, afternoon, everybody. I see I have less than 5 minutes left, so it's probably going to be hard to go through the slides, but I will try anyway to catch the main concept. So what I wanted to do today is try to introduce a way to use ECDSA, which is very well known and has been known for 20 years, in a way that allows faster verification. And I think it's a useful effort for this group. So the outline is the following, and I'll just skip this part in the interest of time. So I just want to recap the ECDSA algorithm. As we all know, it's an elliptic curve-based signature scheme which produces a signature consisting of two components, usually denoted as an R and S, where the second signature component S is dependent on the first signature component and the private key in a way using a signing equation. And the important thing to notice during the signing is that this signature component R is derived from the ephemeral signing key big R. Verification involves several steps. It involves recomputing this ephemeral signing key R and then checking whether it maps to the same signature component small r. So this is a very nice algorithm and has been widely adopted, but the problem with it is that it doesn't really allow fast batch verification, so checking a number of signatures at the same time. There's also a way to speed up a single verification, but that is only possible if we use similar to like EDDSA, so the essentially the Bernstein signature, where the signature, instead of consisting of the small R and S components, replaces this R component by the ephemeral signing key. And what is the impact of that change? The impact is that we can essentially massage the verification equation. That's the last verification step mentioned on this ECDSA star slide. And then it suddenly becomes only an algebraic equation that has to be checked. And so that allows a speed up of roughly 30% in a single verification case. And if you have, for example, a certificate chain, or you have, for whatever reason, you want to check multiple signatures at the same, load balancing or something like that, then you can get a speed up of roughly a factor 6. And the downside is that that the speed up only applies if we use a slightly different format for the signature itself. So the objective of the next few slides is to show that actually the format can be the same. So I'm going to explain this trick, and I think I have only like 1 minute left. I just want to point out on the next slide, there is an example in the RFC 7515 about how to use ECDSA in a JOSI context. And that example gives an ECDSA signature RS, that's option 1, that is printed in that specification. An important thing to notice is that with ECDSA, you always get 2 signatures that are possible, and that is due to the so-called benign malleability property of ECDSA. So instead of having 1 signature, you always can make a second one. And that can be done by anybody without having access to the private keying material. So in terms of this example, you get two options for the signature. And the important property is that in one of the options, if you actually would do the verification step itself, you would have an ephemeral signing key where the so-called y-coordinate of this ephemeral signing key is odd, and the other one it's even. So what you can do is you can try to pick any ECDSA signature of these two options at will. As you see, if we have, for example, the rule that we always want to have the y-coordinate to be even, then we, in this case, pick option 2. But in any case, in all signatures, we have two options. One of them with the signing keys y-coordinate to be odd, and the other one even. So let's look at this. Suppose we always pick the option where the used signing key was with y-coordinate even. Then we are actually able to express the ECDSA signature as yet one of those two options for the same ECDSA signature. So it remains an ECDSA signature, but since the signature consists of the x-coordinate of the signing key and the y-coordinate, if we know the parity of that y-coordinate, we can uniquely recover the ephemeral signing key from the signature itself without first doing the entire verification. And that allows to speed up. So the procedure to get to morph these two signature schemes versions together is that we generate the signature always in the same way as we have done the last 20 years. But if the signing key has an odd y-coordinate, then we just toggle the sign of the second signature component. That allows to represent the signature in such a way that the ephemeral signing key can be recovered and that all the speedups are obtained. I will just go through.
In the interest of
time, I go to the last slide. So I think we don't really have time to go over all the details, but the main reason that I wanted to present something is right now there's lots of interest in initiatives that use JOSI signatures. For example, in e-health initiatives, for example, just to get in a restaurant, you have to show you QR code for lots of things, and that uses JWS signatures. And I think there's an excellent opportunity to make some of these things speedier, but for that we need this to be facilitated by IETF. So the question is whether people are interested in looking at this further, and how we can make sure that we move quickly on that, and what I need to do in order to satisfy your requirements. I'll leave it at that for now.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. If people are interested, for sure be sure to reach out to Rene. He has sent mails to the mailing list, so you will find also there his coordinates. And we are quite over time, so unless there are any special comments, I think we can close at that. Thank you very much for the participation, and have a nice day.
Thanks.